This is Launching Your Daughter podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. Now, here is today's episode. Episode 15. Welcome. Before I introduce my next episode, I just want to give a big hearty thank you to all of my Launching Your Daughter listeners. This has been such a journey, and I really appreciate all the feedback that I have been getting from not only parents, but educators and other therapists. Really appreciate hearing from everyone and letting me know what they find helpful and what they're wanting more of. In today's episode, I am speaking with Sharon Martin, who is a licensed clinical social worker in San Jose, California. And we talk quite a bit about imperfection and trying to empower the parents of role modeling how being imperfect is okay. And that shows different skills into your teen girls of how to really work through an imperfect world that we live in and how to do it with more grace versus struggling with being perfect. In an upcoming episode, I'm actually going to be speaking with a licensed therapist and a coach, and she's going to talk a little bit about how to manage scheduling and time management. So I'm excited to talk with Amanda in the next episode. So hopefully today you will find Sharon is just a wealth of information, and at the end of the episode, she talks about how you can get a hold of her, and she talks about the blog that she writes multiple times throughout the month, and I find her information very, very helpful. Without any more delay, here is today's episode. Well, welcome everybody. Today I have Sharon Martin, and she is a licensed clinical social worker and a psychotherapist, and she's located in San Jose, California. And I'm so excited to have her on today. So welcome, Sharon.
Well, thank you, Nicole, and congratulations on the new podcast. I was just telling you before we started that I've been listening and really enjoying it, so I'm happy to be here with you.
Well, thank you. So I would love if you could tell our listeners today just a little bit about who you are and your practice. I know I've looked up quite a few things about you, and I've seen you in various blogs that you do, and I would like it if you could tell our audience a little more about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Well, like you said, I'm a psychotherapist in San Jose, California, and I work with adults, men and women, and adolescents. And I've worked with teenagers that's where I actually, began my career, is working with teenagers. And so that's something that I have loved from the beginning. And I'm also a mom. I've got a teenage daughter myself, and I also have two sons. And in addition, I am obviously a daughter myself, and I was a teenage girl. And, I think that really is part of the work for me is, pulling on my own personal experience growing up. I know that for me, being a teenage girl was hard, especially the early parts of adolescence. I don't, have really fond memories at that time. I remember a lot of struggles, and it being really hard socially to fit in and find my place. I was a very sensitive kid. I'm still a sensitive adult, but I've figured out some ways of managing that. And, part of, dealing with being so sensitive and not wanting to show my emotions was to really pull them all inside. Yeah. And so I've had to really unwind a lot of that as a person. And then, I can draw on that in my professional work. And the other thing that I really connect with from my own experience and with the clinical work that I do is also wanting to just be so perfect in everything that I do. And this was, again, for me, it was sort of a way of trying to blend in, and I sort of had this idea that if I could be great at everything and never mess anything up, then I wouldn't draw any attention to myself. Right? Sounds good in theory. Right. You can understand it's a good working idea. Clearly not really practical or possible. So that ended up being really limiting because what I have found is that in doing all of that, I really just had lost this sense of who I was. I sort of didn't end up standing for anything or doing anything except stuff that I already knew I was good at, which was only a few things, right? And then, you move into adulthood and, you realize you want to do other things, and it's really scary, so that's a lot of, the personal experience that I bring to it. And those are some of the issues, that I really enjoy working with my clients on as well.
Well, and you talked about, perfectionism. I see that often with both my teen girls and the moms or the women that I work with, that it's just what you were talking about. It's especially in the teenage, adolescent years, you're trying to figure out who you are. You still want to stay close to your parents and your family, and at the same time, draw closer to your peers. But if you're sensitive or more introverted, it's also a struggle because you don't want to be out there so much. And it's like, oh my gosh. So then that idea that, I've got to be perfect in everything so that it all goes smooth and nobody really notices me, or I don't cause a lot of stir, then increases the stress level. And then thinking that, wow, if I make a mistake, it's almost like this world's going to come to an end, and it's not.
Right. But that's the feeling, is that, it'll be so catastrophic, and you want to avoid that. And I think, like you were saying, I definitely connect with that idea of, wanting to please people in general. But I think there's also a specific piece of that, which is wanting to please my parents, and here I am in my 40s, and I can tell you I still, connect with that, wanting them to be happy with me, wanting them to be proud of me, right? And it's like this piece that never quite goes away. It gets smaller, I think, the more we separate from them. But I think there's just something very human and natural about wanting our parents to, be happy with the choices that we're making, or the work we're doing, or the way we're raising our family, right? And there are certain aspects of that which are good, of course, but part of the individuation process that, teenagers are going through is like you were saying, is they need to separate, right? They need to figure out who they are and what their values are and how they want to do things. And a lot of that is just trial and error, right? You need to be able to do things, mess them up or have them not go well, and realize, that wasn't really a great idea, or that wasn't a good decision. Actually, I don't really believe in that, but you can't necessarily know these things until you try them.
Right.
Right. And that's the piece, I think, as parents, if we're able to, give our kids that space to be able to try things, it's really a huge gift, I think. It's tough, though, right? I mean, we can say the words, I love you no matter what, and no matter what happens, sort of, but we need to have the actions, that are part of that unconditional love as well, so that they really can experience, you didn't criticize me when, I decided to do, X, Y, or Z. You, might not have agreed, but you let me do it anyway.
So I want to go kind of down that path that you're talking about. How do you then support the parents of the teen girls in being able to create that connection where they allow the girls to keep giving themselves permission to kind of get outside that perfectionism, where they take a risk, and if they mess up, it's okay? How do you support the parents in letting their daughter kind of, I guess, sometimes fail, or have that failure event? They're not a failure as a person, but they mess up. And how do you support the parents on that?
Well, it's interesting because I think in some ways it's not that different than the way I actually work with the teenager on it. And part of it is actually that the parents need to let go, right? We talk a lot about, the kids are in this process of letting go of their parents and, individuating. But you know what? We're holding on pretty darn tight to our kids, right? It's like, we want you to grow up and go to college and leave home at some point here. But, there's a part of us that's really scared of that, right? We want to keep them safe and secure. And so part of that work with the parent is also having them look at, how they are separate and different, than their child, and how that's a good thing. And again, even just a real practical reality check of, like, you don't really want your child, to stay safe and secure in your little nest at home forever,
right.
And parents don't really, but they sort of miss the in-between, which is, well, then you need to let them go out and do things, and doing things means you will at some point have things not go right. There's going to be mistakes and failures and all of that. And then one of the other things that I really like to do, again, with parents and with adolescents, is have them, really just think about what is it that is going to happen if you mess up.
Yeah.
What are you imagining, this terrible thing is? And, you can kind of just keep going with that, until they imagine, the biggest, possible negative outcome, and then pulling it back in with, how realistic do you think that is? If somebody is, a girl is imagining that if she, fails algebra, that that means that she will not be able to get into college, and she will not be able to become a doctor, and it's like her life is ruined,
Right.
because of this one class, right? And thinking about, there's a lot of different, steps in between here, where you can make adjustments, course correct, and things are rarely as catastrophic as people imagine. There's very few things that are so big, mistakes that are so big that you can't come back from them.
Right. And it's funny that you actually gave that example, because I have also heard that exact same thing in my practice. It's like, but if I miss or fail this one class or this one test, I won't be able to get into any college. It's like, wow, that's huge, and you're right. It's like, there's so many other steps in between all of that. And it's, I call it like finding the evidence that either backs that thought up or disproves that thought. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And I love how the way you approach it for both the parents and the adolescents, it's very much about beginning to trust themselves and doing that inner exploration versus looking outside themselves of either pleasing everybody or doing everything correct because they're so concerned about what that external validation may or may not be. And it's looking at, I've got to find out who I am and begin that exploration as well. What does my life look like with my kids still living at home? What do I'm wanting in my life without, or as the child has been launched and they're off on their own? And then for the girls, here's my life at home, and what do I want as I, continue to grow up into an adult? What do I want that to look like?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because again, I think that there's that really parallel process there. We've got, the teenager, who sort of that developmental stage again is, grappling with identity and who am I, and asking a lot of those questions and trying to figure that out. And then I think, like you're saying, for parents, probably women in particular, we often have at least some sense of a loss of self, I think, through the parenting years, right? When we've put so much into parenting, and especially if this is your last child who's leaving home and you don't have younger ones who you're going to be, parenting at home, you really do have a little bit of that identity crisis going on. Like, okay, like, what do I like to do? Who are my friends? What do I want to do? What are my goals going forward? And you can have a very similar experience, I think, like you were talking about, of needing to kind of figure out who you are once again. That I think just, obviously being a mother will still continue to be a big part of your identity, but it looks very different. I think you don't have, kids right there needing something today in your kitchen.
Yeah, and I talk with the moms that I work with and their kids that it's more as the daughters, teenagers become adults, it's becoming more of that friend. They still look for you for guidance, and at the same time, it does shift that relationship, and it is beginning to see them as an adult as they're off into college and getting older and all of that, and it changes it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Part of what I talk about on the podcast are some of the maybe fears or concerns why teens coming into therapy or parents have. What are some of, I guess, the presenting kind of questions or concerns for people that come into your practice, for whether it's the parents or the teen girls? What are some of the things that they kind of talk about that they struggle with of why they're actually seeking therapy at this time?
If I had to sum it up, I would say the primary concern is, am I okay?
Yeah.
And I think related to that, what I really hear the parents saying is my child going to be okay?
Yeah.
They will bring their daughter in, recognizing to some extent anyway that she's dealing with anxiety or depression. And they just really want some reassurance that she's going to be okay, that she's going to figure it out, she's going to overcome this, that there's hope, I think is, a big part of it. And so, there's an educational piece, that I think that I try to help them with. But I think there's also a piece that's just, it's experiential, and it's having the patience to see, bit by bit, that they're going to be okay, right?
Yeah.
And you dive into that and really get into, well, what does that actually mean? What does okay mean? And, for some people that's, what's their idea of success? What is it they're really wanting for their child?
One thing I know that you talk about as well is just embracing the imperfection. I mean, if they come in seeking, saying, oh, am I okay? And I've got to be perfect. It's really giving themselves permission that being imperfect is enough. And it's not striving to be perfect, because there's where the anxiety is, or the depression starts to come up more, or the body issues start to come up, meaning they're sick more often, headaches more often, because they're creating such a high level of what's the word I'm looking for? I guess kind of that stress, or that
stress.
Yeah, that it manifests in different ways. So yeah, having a lot of the education around just the brain development, the normal development as an adolescent going into adulthood, the change in parenting and what that looks like can really help relieve and, yes, provide hope that things are going okay and that everybody is on the right track, or can readjust it a little bit if needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we want to recognize that, as parents, that we're imperfect. We're in our parenting, and just as people, of course, and I think there can be something that's really helpful, for parents to model that, for their kids. I think just as a society, we're very used to only talking about our successes, and I even find this for myself, that I'm much more likely to share something with my kids that was a success, than to say, oh, I did this and it was a total bomb, nobody liked it. And I got to really rethink how I'm doing that. But doing that, really is that modeling of, look, I mess up on things, right? Certainly they observe us mess up as parents, and they may see a lot of that. But, in other areas of our lives, they may see us as very competent, and it's just internally that we know, we're messing things up. But to actually put it into words can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Just for our kids to be able to say, yeah, look, mom and dad aren't just, these successful professionals. There were, there continued to be times, and there were times when they weren't so successful, so that they can, I think also see that, it's definitely an ongoing process, that you're not going to just wake up one day and feel successful and feel confident.
Well, and I think what you just talked about too, it also takes some of that pressure off the parents. Like, they need to be, they're striving to be that perfect parent, because like, you can't be. As a human being, we are flawed, we are imperfect. And so being able just to role model, like you said, yeah, kids can see it at home, but talking about that professional life as well, it's like, well, here's what I did, and here's how I either corrected it or changed it, or the feedback that I got. So their child knows as well. It's like, oh, it is okay if I mess up, and I can maybe remedy something if possible. And if I can't, okay, life still goes on, but I can tolerate that distress or that uncomfortableness a little easier, because you're telling me that I'm okay, and I know I'm okay then.
Yeah, you're right. Because I think for adolescents, it's still not just for adolescents. I shouldn't say that. I should say for all of us. There's definitely continues to be a piece of wanting external validation, right? And there's something, again, very normal about that.
Yep.
But, I think our goal is for that to become less and our internal validation to become more important to us, right? To have an internal sense that, I'm living according to my values, or I'm doing things that feel meaningful or important to me, and I'm having relationships that feel good to me, that are healthy, and less concerned about like, what does everybody else think about what I'm wearing or who I'm dating or, what I'm eating, right? It's,
Yeah.
what do I think about these things? Do they, connect with who I am? And that's again where we sort of connect back to, needing to know who you are.
Yeah.
And then you start to see where it all gets rather muddy when you're a teenager who really doesn't have a great sense of who she is. Then it's, well, how do I feel good about who I am when I'm not entirely sure who I am, right?
Right.
It's hard, right?
Yeah.
It's there's not always an easy answer, and I think part of it is helping our daughters just stick with it, right? And
Yeah.
realize that, life is the journey. It's not the destination, right? You're not just going to get there and it's all going to click one day,
Right.
We're all still figuring it out as we go.
Yeah. And I think, you've hit it. The part of the next question I usually ask is, what's the benefits? And you've just named it. It's being able to help the girls and the parents explore a little more about who they are, the changes that are coming up, how they can manage them differently, healthier. Are they in healthy relationships versus I know some of the girls that I work with, they've got some really unhealthy friends that they're involved with, and is trying to figure out those boundaries and what's good, what's not, and all of that. So that, they understand that, life is messy. Oh my gosh, is it messy, right? And it is part of our journey. But when we know ourselves, we know our values, we can really then go, oh, that makes more sense if I do this, this, and this, and these are the type of people I'm wanting in my life and why I do. And we're going to have conflicts. We're going to have times where we may not get along. We're going to have times that we feel disconnected, and that's normal. And to be able to come back and go, okay, now let's try and work through this and how we can do it. It's because we know ourselves.
Yes, I think if I had to, sum this part of it up, I would say, I think the benefit is ultimately to feel like you will be able to handle whatever life throws at you.
Yeah.
And again, I think when you're younger, you tend to still have this idea that there's going to be a perfect life, that those, dreams that you had, whatever, the fairy tale or whatever it may be, life's going to somehow come out just like that, or that's what you're working towards, is this ideal, life. And perhaps it's, a little bit of a downer to, tell these girls, I'm sorry, like whatever it is you think your life is going to be, it's not going to turn out that way. It just isn't. There are parts of it that will be even better than anything you could ever imagine.
Right.
And there are parts that, are going to be, things are going to happen that, again, you can't possibly imagine the particular struggles or the particular twist that your life may take. It's only through, life experience that, although, definitely there are teenagers who've had more than their, share of difficulties in childhood. And so that comes into play too. But, I think there's often a little bit of, debunking of that myth that needs to happen. But with that, like I said, once you can establish the sense that you are capable, then that becomes okay.
Yeah.
It's not as scary to think about all the uncertainty, in the world or even within yourself, all the things you can't control. Once you recognize that you can, sort of center yourself and know yourself and love yourself, that you can get through those things.
Beautifully said. Because there's sometimes that fairy tale dream of, it's going to look this way, and it's like, it may not. And part of that is letting go of those expectations and letting it unfold. You create the plans, but not exactly how that's going to maybe manifest itself. And then that's where there's living life more in the moment and being able to let that truly unfold. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes we can get derailed, and other times it's like, wow, I could have never, ever imagined this beautiful opportunity coming my way if I would have just held on to those expectations and limited myself to what that was going to look like. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah. I think that ability to take chances is huge, right?
Yeah.
And, you really do have to be able to move away from the fear and the perfectionism, right, in order to do that, right?
Yes.
Otherwise, you create a very small, safe little world for yourself to live in, which can, feel good in the short term, but ultimately, I think people recognize that, this isn't really very satisfying.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, are there any books or advice that you give parents and or the adolescents kind of in between the sessions that helps them continue to embrace the imperfection or embrace figuring out who they are?
Yes. Well, I'm a big fan of Kristen Neff's book, Self-Compassion.
Yes.
So I definitely recommend that on a regular basis. I would say more for parents. I don't think I've ever recommended it to a teenager, maybe an older teenager, but that's not to say some of them might enjoy it as well, but it's probably written more for an adult audience. But that is a fantastic book, and her resource, which is her website, which is selfcompassion.org, has a lot of resources on it if people are interested in just checking out her work. Really powerful stuff about how loving yourself has huge implications in, not just our relationship with ourselves, but really in everything we do in all of our relationships. So that's fantastic. The other thing that I recommend on a regular basis is just writing things down. And I would say it's not necessarily a journal, although if people like to do that, that's fine. But I have found that there is a lot of benefit in just the process of taking things out of your head and putting them onto paper, whether those are your fears or your goals. There's something that happens in the exercise of doing that somehow kind of makes it more real. It's similar to when we speak it out loud to somebody else, but it's a little bit different. And so that's something that I just think can be really helpful for people is to, pay more attention to what are you thinking and what are you feeling, and have some way of recording that. And you may be surprised, what you notice.
And I laugh because it is sometimes, we've got those just automatic thoughts running through our heads. And when we pause and raise that awareness and start writing it down, it's like, wow, how often am I thinking about that? Okay, I can shift that. I can change that. I can let that go if I need to. And right.
I think we're busy. We're on autopilot, and we often don't take the time to even, about what's going on, in our own mind, in our own body.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sharon, if our listeners would like to get more information about you or find you or get a hold of you, how could they go about doing that?
Well, my website is SharonMartinCounseling.com. So that's all the information about my practice and my blog there. I also write a blog for Psych Central that's called Happily Imperfect, and I am writing a lot on that. So I'd be happy if people want to go and check that out on Psych Central.
And I have to say, those are wonderful blogs, so I hope people do check that out because it really talks about quite a bit of what we've discussed today, and they're very, very helpful.
Good, thank you.
Well, I want to say thank you again for taking the time and being on the podcast today. I've so enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully our listeners have as well. So thank you again, Sharon.
Thanks, Nicole. Take care.
I want to remind you, if you go out to the Launching Your Daughter website, on the podcast page, I do have a sign up for my newsletter and some upcoming online workshops that I'm going to be giving for teen girls. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, go out to www.launchingyourdaughter.com and sign up for my newsletter. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Launching Your Daughter with Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist. For more information or to stay up to date, go to launchingyourdaughter.com. You can sign up for my email list or join my Facebook group. Thank you.